A merry seventh day of Christmas to you in 2023. I'm continuing my series on a critique that has been made of Richard Bauckham's name statistics argument. I'm not even going to try to summarize what I've been going over the last couple of weeks, because this one will take up enough time in and of itself. So go back and listen to those on the podcast or watch them if you're using video to bring yourself up to speed. This time, today, I'm going to be talking about changes to Ilan's database made by Gregor and Blaise in their argument that is critical of Richard Bauckham's name statistics argument for the Gospels. So up to now, we've been talking about changes to the sample in the Gospels and Acts. Today, I'm talking about changes to Ilan's database. Now, I want to start by getting out of the way a couple that I don't really have any big objection to. One is to narrow the time frame somewhat. So, if it can be told that a given occurrence of a name is a person who lived, well after the time of Christ, or well before the time of Christ, even if in the geographical area in question, then they're taking those out. So they're narrowing the time somewhat. I think that's understandable, legitimate, as long as they did it carefully. And to check that, I would have to, go over each and every one in detail. But conceptually, that's understandable. If Ilan makes it clear that something is outside, way outside of Jesus' own time period. The second one, which is really pretty minimal in its impact, is to take the 53 persons whom they considered to be contested, we talked about that last time, and to take them out of the Ilan database. Now, you have to understand that once they've made the other changes as far as time period, they're only looking at about 2,180 names. That's a lot. And so to take 53 out of that is not going to make much of a difference. I caught myself there. 2,180, I should say, persons. And I talked before about the difference between a name and a person, or a name and an occurrence. Okay, so they're taking 53 occurrences out of there. The idea being, hey, if they contest whether these persons existed at all with those names, then they shouldn't leave them in the Ilan database to be compared with the Gospels and Acts. And these, of course, would be occurrences that are only attested in the Gospels and Acts. Ilan took a sort of approach where if something is on the face of it historical, then for the most part she accepts that person as historical. She tries not to get, into a lot of controversial judgments about whether the Gospels and Acts persons are or aren't historical. They're presented as historical, so she includes them. And in 53 of the cases, then, those are occurrences that Gregor and Blaise contest the historicity of. Okay, you take 53 out of that, it's not going to make that big of a difference anyway, and at least it's got an understandable epistemological rationale. But now we come to something that I strongly disagree with, even though I would not say that it was ill-motivated. I am not saying that Gregor and Blaise said, let's do this, and, that'll make the Gospels look less accurate. But I think it was definitely a bad move. And this has to do with adding to Ilan's database what they call artificial occurrences. Now, to explain how they get into this adding of, it ends up being 454 artificial occurrences. That's a lot of occurrences. How they get into this, I have to talk first about 3 persons in the Gospels and Acts among their, contested persons who constitute the only occurrence of that name in Ilan's database. So this is Agabus, Bartimaeus, and the Timaeus, who was supposedly the father of Bartimaeus. Timaeus doesn't actually feature in a story. He's just said to be, the father of Bartimaeus. Agabus is a prophet in the book of Acts, and a guy said to be a prophet, and he prophesies a big famine. And Bartimaeus, of course, is the blind man that Jesus heals in Jericho. Okay, so those three don't occur as names anywhere else in Ilan's database other than as they are taken from the Gospels and Acts. So if you take them out, when you're taking out those 53 contested persons, now they're going to be 0 in Ilan's database, 0 occurrences of those names. So Gregor and Blaise say, well, we want there to be, some chance to draw each of these, even though they only occur in the Gospels and Acts. So we're going to add back in an artificial occurrence for each of them. Well, that would still only be 3. So it looks like it's motivated initially to be sort of fair to Bauckham's thesis, because otherwise there would be 0 opportunity to draw this from the modified Ilan database once we've taken out the contested persons. So now we're going to add back in those 3 because they're the only occurrence. Okay, so you can contrast that with if you take out 8 Simons who are contested persons from the Gospels and Acts. You're still going to have a bunch of Simons in Ilan's database, so it's not like there's going to be a 0 chance of selecting the name Simon. Okay, so it's like they're doing us a favor, sort of. But then they say, and we add a single artificial occurrence of every single name. Now, this is name in Ilan's database, and there's a total, by their count, of 454 names, of which 3, by their count, are ones that wouldn't be there at all if it weren't for the Gospels and Acts. We're going to add 1 apiece for all the other 451. And they have a footnote where they say, well, this is standard practice when comparing 2 databases that have only partially overlapping statistics, only partially overlapping content. But, when you consider that once we take out the 53 contested, now it's about 2,128 persons, occurrences in Ilan's database. 454 is an appreciable fraction of that. And the minute I saw that, when I was reading the article, I was like, what kind of effects is that going to have? And I mentioned it to my husband, Tim, when we were taking a walk, and he said, that sounds like the kind of thing that might not matter if you were dealing with gigantic databases, because it would be sort of a drop in the bucket, but that could have a more distortive effect the smaller the database gets. And so even though Ilan's database is, over 2,100 occurrences, still to add 454 they're basically artificial persons to this, 1 each for every name, that does have a major effect. So let me talk now briefly about a couple of the effects of that. In broad terms, it tends to flatten the difference between really popular and really rare names. So if you take a very popular name in Ilan's database like Simon, we would just add 1 Simon, but we had 453 non-Simons. So if you think of a saltwater solution, if you add a lot more water, it's going to be a lot less salty. Well, similarly, if I add only, only a tiny bit more Simon and a whole lot more non-Simon, I'm watering down the popularity of Simon. Okay? And then on the other hand, take a very rare name like Harkak, Harqaq, of which they state there's only one instance in Ilan. It's not in the Gospels and Acts at all. I want to pause here to point out the Gospels and Acts are not the only contributors of single instance names. Okay, there are plenty of other single instance names that you just found, like one of these on an ossuary, for example. So that this should remove any notion that, well, Agabus, if that name is only found in the Gospels and Acts, that's like super duper suspicious. No, because Ilan has other names for which she only has one instance. After all, Ilan's database itself, let's bear in mind, is itself a sample of reality. We shouldn't be getting ourselves locked into the idea that, literally the only names that belong to any Palestinian males during that time were the ones captured in Ilan's database. And just the very fact that she has some where there's this, just by chance, a find of one instance of that name, there certainly could easily be more like that, even within that time frame and that spatial region. Take a rare name like Harkak. Now, we've just doubled its occurrences, right? Because there was one, added another one, now there's two. So what this tends to do is increase the proportion of rare names in Ilan's database, okay? The contribution, the percentage that are rare, by adding occurrences, one occurrence to everything without regard to its popularity, while lowering the proportion of a name like Simon that is very popular. Okay, so as I say, it tends to flatten out that distinction somewhat. And this is relevant because Gregor and Blaise complain, as I mentioned last time, that there are too many Simons. Well, there are a couple of things that are contributing to that. First, mutilating the Gospels at sample, which I talked about in the last couple of weeks, so that we're only taking a 53-fold sample. And then the Simons will appear to be a much bigger percentage of that. But then at the same time, adding a bunch of non-Simons that we know didn't exist, they're just artificial persons, to the Ilan database. And you put those two together and you get their conclusion that 3 to 4 Simons is the number that we should expect to be finding among the contested names in the Gospels and Acts. And instead, we have 8, and it's like, oh boy, there's too many Simons. Well, if we raise our sample size to the 79 that they started with, and then we don't have all of these artificial instances, then our mean in that we should expect, which would be just about 6 Simons. So, okay, 8 is a little more than 6, but it's a lot closer to 6 than it is to 3. So you can see right away how these factors are contributing to the complaint of too many Simons or too few rare. It exaggerates the proportion of rare names and downplays the proportion of Simons within Ilan's database. Now, you might say, well, but they were, trying to avoid a situation where there was a 0 chance for Agabus to be chosen. What else could they do? I'm glad you asked. An alternative, which would be much less distortive and is also a common statistical practice, would be to aggregate rare names. So suppose we define a rare name as a name that has only one occurrence in Ilan, including its occurrences in the Gospels and Acts. And they actually say that this is the definition they're working with. It's not clear. They might be working with actually a somewhat different definition in practice, but we'll go with that one because that's the definition they say they're using. For purposes of illustration, it doesn't matter whether you say, two or fewer or one in Ilan, but, you define it. All right, and then you have this name, this name, this name, this name, this name, all right, over, 200, and then you have or rare, okay, for the remaining ones that occur only once. So you aggregate those as a category within Ilan, and you aggregate them as a category within the Gospels and Acts. Now, what that does is that a name like Agabus, then it's just another occurrence of a rare name. Okay, so by the definition, it's a rare name in Ilan because it, only occurs once, happens to be the time that it occurs in Acts. Okay, and so then that's just another instance of a rare name. And by doing that, we don't have to add any of these artificial instances. We don't have to add, hundreds of occurrences of a name appearing to represent people whom we know we have no evidence for their existence. Like, oh yeah, we're just going to add an extra guy named Simon, an extra guy named Harkak, an extra guy named this, an extra guy. Yeah, no, that way madness lies, as you might say. So aggregating the instances would be a lot less of an impactful, if I can use an ugly word, a lot less of a severe change to the Ilan database, and is statistically definitely preferable here. So that's kind of intense, but you can see how these changes, even if they're not motivated in a negative way, can make a really major difference to the statistical outcomes. So you have to be careful with them. Next time, I'm going to be talking about the claim that they're then comparing the outcomes in the Gospels to what they call the most extreme alternative hypothesis to the Gospels' accuracy or historicity or whatever. What's the most extreme? So they say, hey, we're going to try to test the most extreme alternative, and then they claim in several places that the Gospels and Acts don't do any better than this most extreme version, and I'm going to contest the claim that really is the one they use, the most extreme alternative. So I hope you'll come back. I know this stuff is kind of dusty and kind of intense, but it's of interest if you want to really know what's going on here, instead of just saying, the Bauckham name statistics argument has been debunked, we're done, we're out of here, goodbye. You need to find out more about this. Okay, so I hope you'll come back and join us next time. Once again, a happy 7th day of Christmas to you.